Dear everyone, thank you for joining. We have just started recording the meeting and with
Adina, please make host.
this I would like to hand Triple C.
Again, already my video is okay.
Dear delegates and colleagues, welcome to this important workshop on mainstreaming gender across climate change and disaster statistics. My name is Fleur Newman and I lead the intergovernmental work on gender under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and Paris Agreement. I am delighted to be your moderator today in an event that was jointly organised with UNDRR, UN Women and the UN Climate Change Secretariat. Such interagency collaboration, as well as the sharing of country experiences, which will happen throughout this workshop, are vital to accelerating and scaling up good practices that are of the foundational activity of identifying, gathering, producing, and applying gender data for climate action and disaster risk reduction. Last year, natural disasters cost the world $150 billion, and this year has seen more record-breaking climate-related disasters. This has been an extraordinary year in other ways too. Losses for livelihoods and the economy before COVID-19 hit were already expected to increase because of a decade-long rise in natural catastrophes with direct links to climate change. While COVID-19 is the most pressing challenge of today, the climate change emergency remains the most pressing challenge for humanity over the long term. To meet the Paris Agreement goal of keeping global temperatures to 1.5 degrees and avoiding the worst impacts of climate change, we need to rapidly transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient economies and societies. We need to be doing things differently, and that includes ensuring that gender considerations are embedded in all responses to climate change and disaster risk reduction. Under the intergovernmental process on climate change, member states have recognized the importance of sex disaggregated data and gender analysis to ensure more effective action on addressing climate mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. At COP25, countries agreed on the Enhanced Lima Work Programme on Gender and its Gender Action Plan. The Gender Action Plan includes several activities aimed at strengthening the capacities of countries to gather, produce and apply gender data in all aspects of climate policy and action, including in the context of climate-related disaster risk reduction. The outcomes of this workshop are expected to contribute to this body of knowledge and identify useful next steps. Before I go on, some housekeeping. Please keep your camera off and your microphone muted unless invited to turn them on. However, please feel free to introduce yourself via chat. We will be using the online interactive tool app Mentimeter throughout the event, so you may wish to have your phone or tablet ready at menti.com. The agenda for the next 3 hours includes an introductory session, a short interactive Menti exercise, followed by presentations on gender data production, another short Menti exercise, and then we'll turn to presentations on data user perspective and conclude with a longer interactive Menti session where participants will be asked a number of questions that will help us identify the way forward. We will have a short break in the middle. With those few words, I'd like to turn now to my colleague, Inka Kadasahanova, Regional Advisor on Gender and Climate Change in UN Women's Asia Pacific Regional Office, to offer some welcoming words and share with us background on the Empower project and objectives for this workshop. Inka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fleur. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to see so many people attending this online event. This is particularly remarkable as I know that towards the end of the year, all of us get increasingly busy with the year-end activities and planning the work for the next future. So on behalf of UN Women, let me express our gratitude for your participation at this meeting, and I'm really looking forward to the fruitful discussion in the next 3 hours. So this project is organized under the framework of the regional program that's implemented by UN Women in partnership with UN Environment. This program aims at mainstreaming gender in the climate change and disaster risk reduction policies in Asia and the Pacific. The program is implemented in 3 pilot countries, Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and also has a whole range of various regional activities. Most of those regional activities aim to share the examples of best practices from the 3 pilot countries, disseminate the knowledge and information across the region, and also to demonstrate at the global level the achievements of Asia and the Pacific in the area of gender mainstreaming in climate and DRR policy landscape. The project is working on building the capacity of the civil society organizations, women leaders, entrepreneurs, government officials, and entities and practitioners working on various aspects of gender mainstreaming in policy. And statistics is one of the most important angles of gender mainstreaming. It is well known that without the solid data and evidence, none of the policy making can be done, and it's also very important to collect the right evidence for monitoring the progress in those policies in the area of climate and DRR. So we all know that the climate change affects all of us, but the impacts are different, and most vulnerable are those people who have less coping capacity. And most often these are the women that are differently impacted by climate change and disasters, and they're the ones that are most vulnerable. Within the scope of the Empower project, we have started working on collecting the evidence and data, and also trying out some methodologies and tools on understanding what is specific impact of women and how data can measure this impact and demonstrate the gender-based inequalities in this field. So it became immediately apparent at the start of the project that there is a significant data gap, that there are specific challenges and constraints that are faced by both the data producers and the data users. Many of those gaps, they linked to either poor data systems and services. Also, they have been linked to the inadequate capacity on the side of the data users and the data producers when it comes to the generation, use, and application of gender statistics to support the policy making in these 2 areas. So the objective of our meeting today is exactly to look at those challenges and what are the successful cases and best practices in the region, and how the gender statistics can improve the policy making and support the commitments of the national governments that they are now taking in the few last remaining weeks of the year when they have to announce their NDCs. We also would like to look at the capacity constraints in terms of the individual capacity, institutional capacity, financial or coordination challenges that are faced by the national data producers, and which solutions have been developed. We would like to collect the case studies from the region on the generation of use of gender statistics from policymakers. And then as a result of this exercise, we hope that we can document those good practices and then possibly share them in some publication next year. So lastly, I would like to thank our partner agencies, UNFCCC Secretariat and the UN DRR for jointly hosting this workshop. And also I would like to thank the speakers who agreed to share with us their experiences today. So without any further ado, I would like to wish everyone a fruitful workshop, and I am passing the floor to the next speaker, Sarah Valero. Sarah, please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Inkar. Okay, bear with me just 1 second. I need to share, but let me see. Okay, can you see my screen now? I'm going to assume you can, if I don't hear otherwise. So really quickly.
Yes, we can, Sarah.
Okay, perfect. I won't take too much of your time. Basically, I would like to let you know about an initiative that we have been implementing for a while, which is been done in partnership with our colleagues from UNEP, from ESCAP, and from IUCN, which is really an initiative to try to integrate gender into environment statistics for the Asia Pacific region. So, you know, here in UN Women, we always say that, you know, without gender equality, you cannot achieve any of the SDGs, right? Like, how are you going to eliminate poverty if 50% of the population, which is women, remain poor, right? And so on and so forth for all the rest of the goals. However, when you look at the SDG framework, actually, the gender-related indicators are really concentrated on certain goals. Then some other goals are a little bit gender sparse, and then some other goals are completely gender blind, right? And if you look at the environment and climate related indicators, they either fall under gender sparse or under gender blind. So we decided that obviously we had to do something about this, especially given that we work in the Asia Pacific region, and this is the world's region that receives the most disasters, the deadliest disasters, and with such a high dependence on natural resources, right? So we started hearing from member states that there was a need for this, and they needed help to identify specific indicators and to collect related data. So we decided to work and start putting together a framework to measure some of these issues. So the purpose of this framework is by no means to force everybody to collect this data, but rather to provide a battery of indicators for people who want to collect this data, whose national strategies or national plans include components on disasters, on climate change, on environment, so that different governments could measure this from a gender perspective. So we looked at the SDGs, and within the SDG framework, there were 93 indicators that were considered quote unquote environment indicators. Then we also look at some work that IUCN and UNEP had done in the past, where they had added 19 additional indicators on gender and environment, and identified those as priorities. And there was a little bit of overlap between those and the 93 from the SDG sets. And for our Asia Pacific set, we look at all of those, we pick the ones that we thought were relevant for the region, and we added some additional indicators because we still consider there were many gaps. Now, when I say we, of course, it's the three agencies, but in addition, we actually conducted 2 consultations with member states, with experts from academia, and with representatives from other UN agencies. So this was very much a country-driven effort where representatives from National Statistics Office, but also from National Disaster Management Agencies, Ministries of Women, Ministries of Environment, etc., participated actively. So we divided our indicators into these 4 areas: land and biodiversity, natural resources, including food, energy, and water, climate change and disasters, sustainable consumption, production, and waste, health, well-being, and sanitation, and environmental decision-making. And then after coming up with this framework and a number of indicators under each of the categories, we conducted another consultation, a global one this time, and we heard from member states what they thought would be a good idea to add for Asia Pacific countries. And what we heard was that there were several areas that we still had gaps on, and we had to identify additional indicators for some of these areas, including exposure to disasters, environment-related conflicts, migration and displacement, gender-based violence in the context of environment, harnessing traditional ecological knowledge, and women in environmental conservation roles, as well as rural women's leadership and environmental issues, small-scale industries, environment-related employment and livelihoods, and finally, sustainable production, consumption, including sustainable agricultural practice, organic farming, and waste management. So since then, we've been working hard to identify some of these additional indicators to fill some of these gaps. And I know, and you will hear very soon from our colleague, Jessica, that here in the Asia Pacific region, in 3 countries, right, in Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam, you have been working really hard within your own governments to identify what are some of the government priorities in this regard. So perhaps we could look at some of these indicators and see if we can fill some of these gaps, right? So that's in terms of where the framework stands. In addition, I wanted to let you know that we have developed a model questionnaire. This is a model questionnaire with a number of modules. So the list of modules appears here on top, right? On household characteristics, consumption, water, sanitation, energy, disasters, climate change, asset ownership, and decision-making and mobility. So this is basically, again, a battery of modules that different countries can choose to add to existing surveys, either as attached modules or as standalone surveys, or even just as additional questions to existing surveys, to measure some of these issues on gender and the environment. And I see that colleagues from Bangladesh National Statistics Office, as well as from Mongolia National Statistics Office, are online. And these are two of the countries that are actually pilot testing some of these questionnaires. And very soon we will have some data available for these countries. So I'll leave it at this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And it certainly looks like a really exciting project. I'd now like to introduce Vasiti Soko, Director of the National Disaster Management Office in Fiji. Vasiti's experience spans 10+ years in the highly technical field of geospatial science and surveying. She has managed weather systems, redeveloped the way Fiji surveys the Earth's surface, and excelled despite the challenges of operating in a male-dominated field. She has assisted several significant projects while working for the Fijian government and the private sector. She is the first female to hold the office of the Director of National Disaster Management Office. She is also current co-chair of the Pacific Risk Governance Technical Working Group and vice chair of the Technical Working Group on Disaster-Related Statistics Asia Pacific. Vasiti, please turn on your camera and microphone and share with us Fiji's experience and priorities in using gender data to inform DRR and climate change action.
Thank you very much, and a big bula vinaka to everybody that's tuning in. Thank you for allowing Fiji to represent the Pacific in this very important forum. My topic today is basically to talk a little bit on Fiji's experience in using gender disaggregated data to better inform disaster risk reduction as well as climate change. And I promise I won't take too much of your time. In the context of the recent experience, Fiji has recently, not only did we respond to COVID-19, but while we were responding to COVID-19, we were also hit with Tropical Cyclone Harold, a Category 4 cyclone that made a landfall to the eastern division of Fiji, which later became a declaration under disaster, where humanitarian actors were mobilized to Fiji. The dual impacts of pandemic and the cyclone-related disaster required an integrated disaster risk management approach, which closed engagement between health officials and disaster management authorities and other line ministries, as well as civil societies and organizations. Due to the travel and distance restriction response to TC Harold, as well as COVID-19, we relied heavily on local level actors. A significant part of the dual response involves subnational level coordination, as well as community engagement, including vulnerable population within the community. Civil society organization, NGOs, and the Red Cross played a key role in community engagement. In regards to the dissemination or the data that was used during response, damage assessment data provided by the Subnational Emergency Operations Center to the National Disaster Management Office is disaggregated by gender, disability, and age. And because of this information, we were able to deploy assistance to areas that were very much in need, specifically to the need that was demanded on the ground. Displacement data, including people in evacuation center, is also gender disaggregated. Data related to vulnerability and coping capacity, including access to resources, decision-making role, access to information, life skills dependency on natural resource still needs to be improved. However, The Fijian government is working hard to ensure that this is implemented and mainstreamed down to the vulnerable groups of society. A good example of this was when we had tropical cyclone Sarai that hit Fiji last year around December. The disability community in Fiji activated its very own emergency operations center, where the needs of the vulnerable groups were addressed directly to them, and then through them, emergency response that they could not address was then brought to our attention at national level. A few challenges for us to ensure the better use of existing information and increase the relevance of official statistics. We need to get involvement of better agencies that are part of the national statistics system in measuring hazards, event, and disaster. One of the things that we've discussed internally, the Desinventor system, we would like to have that mainstream down to national level. Gender inclusion principle needs to be fully integrated into statistical methodology, tools, and system, where gathering of sex disaggregated data is mandated in order to generate gender mainstreaming in practice. The objective is to produce disaster statistics from a gender perspective to inform all phases of disaster management, as well as disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. The challenges going forward will be to ensure that policymakers and implementers understand gender issues and have the capacity and resources to undertake gender analysis and implement gender mainstreaming. Some of the gender response law and policy framework that we have in Fiji, given women's critical role in climate change adaptation and mitigation, as well as disaster resilience, the government of Fiji has recognized the gender dimension of disaster and climate change action in its 2017 Climate Vulnerability Assessment Report. Disaster and climate risk governance require a coherent national policy response, underpinning the national law to ensure that current socioeconomic vulnerability, including gender inequality and poverty, are not increased by adaptation or mitigation activity. Gender sensitive and gender inclusive approach need clear mandate to ensure they occur. This is something that Fiji recognizes and is pursuing through the National Disaster and Climate Change Law and Policy. And just to give the participant some of the actions that the Fiji government is currently doing, the current National Disaster Management Act of 1998 that mandates the National Disaster Management Office to operate is gender blind and does not provide for gender equality and gender response implementation. However, because of this main reason, we are now reviewing our disaster legislation. And in this new legislation that is going to be tabled soon to our Solicitor General's office, we are now including or gathering of sex disaggregated data is now a requirement. So we factor in gender issues as well as the vulnerable groups. The current revision of the Disaster Act provides an excellent opportunity to include strong commitments to gender equality and women empowerment in its core principle and objective related to women empowerment and participation of women at level. The other policy that the Fiji government has also launched, which factor in gender inclusion, is the Fiji National Disaster Risk Reduction Policy 2018 to 2030. This is Fiji's commitment to the Sendai framework. The new National Disaster Risk Reduction Policy 2018 to 2030 includes gender inclusion principle as part of the policy implementation process. Gender inclusion principle will need to be fully integrated into the checklist and plans for sector in order to generate gender mainstreaming in practice. We also have the climate change bill. An important common factor in the various forms of climate change adaptation is that climate change is a cause of environment and social economic disruption. Decisions about how to adapt to the disruptions of climate change can increase existing gender inequality in power and resources or open up new opportunities for gender inclusive adaptation and more equal and sustainable development. With the NDMO, we are currently developing the community-based disaster risk reduction policy. This is another tool or policy that we are now developing to ensure gender inclusion. So as I mentioned earlier, the development of the CBDRM policy is currently underway in Fiji. The CBDRM policy will include gender inclusion principles. There is a need for the policy and the legislation basis to increase all women empowerment and representative in decision-making roles in disaster risk management institution at all levels. The climate change bill, as alluded earlier, the climate change bill 2019 and the new climate change policies, including the National Climate Change Policy 2018 and 2030 and the Planned Relocation Guideline, include strong commitments to gender equality and women empowerment in their core principles and objective. Instruments must be put in place to include measures on how to move towards gender partiality in policy-making, decision-making, and implementing roles and bodies as key elements of women empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a few of the initiatives that the Fiji government is currently implementing to ensure that all our policies and our decision makers are all inclusive into the gender principles. Thank you very much. If there's any question, I'm happy to take it after the workshop.
Thank you very much, Vasiti. There was a lot to take in there. There's a lot going on in Fiji in this respect, and I was particularly struck by the intersectional, multidimensional approach to the responses to the latest disaster. We are going to now move to the first of our Mentimeter exercises, in which participants are able to share with us their answers. You can access Mentimeter either via your phone or tablet, or by opening another tab in your browser. We suggest using a separate device so that you don't have to switch between the meeting and the app, but you can make that choice yourself. You'll find the link to menti.com in the chat, and you can enter the code 6168665 when you get to menti.com. And then you can vote on the first question. So, where in the world are you? Great. So we're starting to see the first submissions here. So we have Malaysia and Sri Lanka, Australia, Vietnam, Fiji, Korea and India, and okay. I'm being told that you may not be able to see the Menti results at this stage, but they should be appearing very shortly. We can also see Malaysia and Nepal. Okay, we're just resharing the screen. Solomon Islands, Bangladesh, Thailand. It's great to see a broad range across the region. Let me just see where we are at. I'll give it a moment longer because we have about 48 people in the meeting. And we have about half that having responded, so I'll give it a moment. When you go to menti.com, you can just enter into, there'll be a space for you to type in your country name. if you use the code 6168665, you'll see the question. So then we might move then to the next Menti question. And in this one, what we'd like to know is in what area, and you can choose more than one, in what area you are working. And the choices here are climate change, disaster risk reduction, gender equality and women's empowerment, producing statistics, using statistics, qualitative research, or other. Perhaps unsurprisingly, there are many people working on gender equality and women's empowerment issues, but also probably an equal number of people working on climate change and disaster risk reduction. And also an equal number who identify as using and producing statistics. And a few also working on qualitative research. So a good broad range of the areas in which this workshop is addressing. And again, I'll just leave it a few seconds for people to make their selections, and you can choose more than one. That's great. Thank you so much for participating. We will be using this tool throughout the workshop, and the code will remain the same. So the one that's at the top of the slide, 6168665, that will be the same one we use throughout the workshop. So turning now to our second session, we are going, in this session, we will hear from 4 speakers, their different perspectives and approaches to the production of gender statistics for climate action and disaster risk reduction. Each speaker has just under 10 minutes to present, after which there will be a few minutes for Q&A. We encourage you to write your questions in the chat box during the presentations, but you may also use the raise hand function if you wish to speak to raise your question at the end of the presentation. When writing in the chat, please remember to mention to whom the question is addressed, as the speaker may also write their answer in the chat if time runs out. Our first speaker in this session on producing gender statistics in climate action and disaster risk reduction is Jessica Gardner, statistics consultant at the Empower Project UN Women. Jessica is a statistician and data analyst with almost 30 years of experience, mainly in the public sector and in international organisations. Now based in South Australia, she works as a consultant for United Nations agencies in countries across Asia and the Pacific and in Europe and Central Asia. Jessica, if you could please turn on your microphone and camera and share with us the work on data being undertaken in the Empower project.
Thank you so much, Fleur, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to join you here today. I'm very happy to have this opportunity because it's been a while that we've been working together in the region, and I see many familiar faces and names, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from other speakers in this session and to the opportunity for us to share our experiences in this work. So climate change and disasters are obviously one of the most significant and urgent issues of our time, and the need for data and evidence is also urgent, not just about our environment, but how the changing climate is impacting individuals, families, and communities. And we know that people are not a homogenous group. We need data that distinguishes between women and men, boys and girls. We need data that distinguishes by age, by location, by disability, and a whole range of characteristics. And this is the only way we can see where gender gaps are and if certain groups are being excluded or disadvantaged. Gender data reveal important gaps like women's underrepresentation in decision-making around climate change or around disaster management, so that we know the gaps exist and that we can do something about it, but also that we need to track how this is changing over time. Where we do have data on the gender differences between people's experiences when it comes to impact by climate change or by disasters, we do see that there are gaps between women and men. We do see differences, and that data is what we have to shed light. Sometimes it's more women than men experiencing a disaster in a certain way, and other times it can be the reverse. But unless we have data, we just simply don't know. There are significant gaps and differences in how we manage our natural resources and environment. For example, women are producing most of the world's food, yet they own very little agricultural land. So rural women are particularly vulnerable to climate change and have limited access over resources and control of those resources. So to take action on these issues, we need high quality gender data that are regularly produced and made available for use. But yet we have many gaps to fill. Some of the areas where data is most needed is to tell us where our populations are and who are the most vulnerable and exposed to these issues. When there is a disaster, who is impacted? Where is the loss of life? And where is the loss and damage to dwellings and to infrastructure? We need to know where people are working, in which industries and places that may or may not be more or less impacted by climate change. So we need data on employment and education. Also, resilience factors point to access to education, employment, and other resources. And of course, shelter and access to safe water and sanitation. These are all areas where we need data, and we need that data to be disaggregated so we can have a gender perspective as well as a social inclusion perspective. Now, we know that this is has been agreed to internationally. The Sustainable Development Goal Indicator Framework has gender very squarely anchored in it, and also climate change as a cross-cutting issue. There are a few indicators in that framework that we can use to highlight gender gaps in climate change and disasters, but we need to go further than that. There are other agreements which clearly show the demand for this data. The UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction through the Sendai framework has identified gender-sensitive indicators where countries report against those, but at the moment that reporting is optional and there's not much data coming through. But the framework is clearly there, the commitment is there. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women has a general recommendation, number 37, that calls on all member states to report gender-sensitive and sex-disaggregated data in all their work on climate change and disaster risk reduction. And of course, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change has their Gender Action Plan and a strong focus on supporting the improvement of data in this area. We have the work that's going on regionally and globally that Sarah mentioned before to look at this issue and develop common approaches, common indicators, and support through questionnaires and other methodological approaches that can help countries fill some of these data gaps. So there's a demand for data coming from that work as well. And of course, most importantly, we need to look at the national demands for data. And here I use the example from Cambodia, who we'll hear from later. We also have our colleagues from Vietnam and Bangladesh, we've been working together in these three countries to really look at what are the national demands and what are the commitments and what data is available and what can be done to improve that. So these documents together all form a very strong basis for taking action, and they can be used to identify a common set of indicators that really provides impetus to improve these data gaps. And that's exactly what we've been doing in these 3 countries, Bangladesh, Cambodia and Vietnam, and also regionally to look at what could be a regional set for Asia and the Pacific that would help us work towards filling these data gaps. So this set of indicators draws very much on these existing commitments. The idea is not to add burden to national statistical systems, but to support them to provide better disaggregated information and to make that accessible and help policy and decision makers to use that information effectively. So there's about 30, 40 indicators in this recommended set that's being developed through this work. But not only have we identified the indicators, we need to provide documentation that shows national statistical officers and other data producers, because there are many involved in this, exactly how to produce these indicators. Now, this is just one part of a big puzzle, really, and the journey to getting good gender data will take time. The support for developing these nationally relevant processes that's happened through the Empower project has been a wonderful initiative. It's allowed these systems to reflect on what the demands are, where the data are coming from and what can be done to improve that. And it's a really valuable way forward. It's a possibility to test what works, to build national capacity, and to share experiences like we are coming together in this regional workshop to have that opportunity to share experiences so we can continually improve in this area. And as Inka mentioned earlier, the Empower project will continue to share the lessons learned from this work so we can make progress both nationally and together. Thank you. Back to you, Fleur.
Thank you very much, Jessica. That it really does show the depth of what can be done with the frameworks that we already have. And I'm going to we're going to take 5 minutes now, or a few minutes, to open the floor to questions that anyone may have. And also, of course, if there were any questions for Vasiti's, based on Vasiti's presentation earlier, that this is also a good time for those questions. And you can put your questions in chat, or you can indicate that you'd like to speak. I'm not seeing any questions at this stage, but whilst we wait to see if anybody has any questions, Jessica, I'd ask whether, based on your work with Bangladesh, Cambodia and Vietnam, and at a regional level, whether there's anything that you'd like to highlight as a key learning for gender data production.
Thanks, Fleur. Yes, a couple of things do stand out to me. One in particular is the strength of support there is for this work at the national level, and quite a lot of optimism, actually, I would say, in terms of what could be achieved, which is a great environment to work in. What obviously strikes me in terms of challenges is the fact that it really is such a multi-stakeholder effort. There are so many different key ministries and stakeholders and players involved at the national level, for obviously the National Statistical Office and the National Women's Machinery, Environment, Land, Agriculture, a very long list of key players, and bringing those people together it obviously requires strong leadership, whether that comes from the National Statistical Office as as it has in Bangladesh, for example, and we'll hear from a moment from our colleagues there, the really BBS, the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, has been quite the driving force behind the work there. Whereas in Cambodia, things are slightly different. The NSO, the National Statistical Institute, is a key player there, of course, but the leadership is coming more from the Ministry of Women's Affairs in this work. So it's been really interesting to see how these things have played out differently in each national setting, and to bring those lessons together, I think, for support at the regional level.
Thank you, and I think that's this is a recurring theme about the need for coordination across different disciplines and sectors, and leadership can come from many different places. I see a request from Govinda to ask a question.
Good evening, everybody. This is Govinda from Nepal, and then thank you for very nice presentations that I have seen both presentations. But I have a question that maybe the questions are some concern that I think in my mind. Regionally, nationally, there are many structures and processes of generating the gender-based data. They have the systems, but when you see in the ground level, the budgeting and implementations to promote especially the vulnerable and marginal groups, especially the women, to promote their livelihoods and other things, and that is lacking. Only the data are maintained, but there is no clear plan to invest for the people, or especially the sections they are living in the ground. So how do you think, and how do you recommend the countries and at regional level to promote the more investment to the women's, people with disabilities in the development process, not only limiting in the generating data, but also linking that in the investment to uplift the life of the people, especially women and people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And I think I will ask, first I will ask Vasiti if there was anything that you wanted to share from Fiji's experience in response to that question.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. For Fiji's experience, for us, we first need to get the data on board. And when I say data, we work very closely with Ministry of Women, as well as Ministry of Women in Fiji is also responsible for disability community and the vulnerable groups, and therefore ensuring that during the event of a disaster that they are represented in our office is critical in terms of our response. Now, in terms of investment into areas of need, once you have the data correct, you have the visuals, you'll then be able to integrate that into policy, as well as integrate that into part of decision making. And for that main reason, because we have a national disaster risk reduction policy, the Fiji government has integrated the need of vulnerable groups in Fiji into policy, ensuring that each activity, in actual fact, the Fiji National Disaster Risk Reduction Policy has 122 action activity, which is cross-ministry, in which every action they do is an accomplishment of Fiji's achievement under the Sendai framework. And part of that 122 action activity is mainstreaming disaster risk reduction to the vulnerable group as well as women. And that, for us, is how we ensure that the needs of the marginal group are represented. This is also now being reflected in a revised act, in which a few of our SOPs are also mandated to include REMS in evacuation centers that are newly built. So Fiji, I strongly would like to advocate the need for integration, with respective ministries and having the right data in order to better improve our policy.
Thank you very much, Vasiti. And very quickly, Jessica, if you had any reflections on that question.
I think that we all know that there's really no point having data if it's not used to effect, and obviously directing, helping decision making around investment is one of those areas that we can use data for. So I feel that in answer to this good question is really more investment in helping making data accessible, because we do have data that is there but not so accessible, and that means obviously making it available, but also helping non-statisticians to find and use that data.
A very important point. Thank you. So now I would move to our next presenter, Rafiq Islam, Project Director for Strengthening Environment, Climate Change and Disaster Statistics, ECDS, Project, Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. In addition to the ECDS project, he was responsible for developing Bangladesh's environment statistics 2016 to 2030, complying with international frameworks. He is also responsible for conducting the sex, age and disability disaggregated data collection according to the integration of climate change, adaptation, vulnerabilities and gender in partnership with UN Women. Rafiq, I invite you to turn on your microphone and camera and speak to us about identifying, addressing the data needs for climate and disaster action. You have just under 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished resource persons, academics, government delegates, UN and delegates, as well as UNM and Bangladesh team. Ladies and gentlemen, this is MD Rafiq Islam, Joint Director, Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. I am delighted to join this very auspicious, important online workshop. Thank you for giving me chance for talking and presenting Bangladesh as a status for integrating environment, climate change and adaptation, vulnerabilities and gender and social inclusion. Sorry. This is my content. This is our country background on statistics. You all know that Bangladesh is a densely populated country, is located in the South Asia. Bangladesh is a low-lying deltaic country with 405 rivers, including 57 transboundary rivers covering an area of 147,000 square kilometers and supporting about 166 million people with density of 1,116 per square kilometer. It is 18 floodplain with fertile land as well as a agro-based country. Per capita income is $2,064 and GDP growth is at 55.24. Due to COVID pandemic situation, it was about 8. The geography and climate have made the country vulnerable to different meteorological, hydrological, geological hazards. These hazards often lead the disaster, and major ones of the country are flood, cyclones, droughts, tidal surge, tornadoes, river erosion, salinity erosion, epidemic, and various forms of pollutions. Extreme poverty rate in the country dropped 12.9% of the total population in financial year 2015 to 16 from 18.5% in 2010 due to massive economic development. Our environmental scenario, we have, there are 3 tiers of environmental data in Bangladesh by HDG. Environmental data availability by HDGs tier 1 and 2. Only available data is 48%, or 52%. This is our main concern for fill up the gap. According to, for example, HDG's 5 goals of environmental data available in Bangladesh. Please see the slides. HDG 11, only 50% data is available in Bangladesh. SDG 12, responsible consumption and production goal, only 7.7% data we have. And climate action, SDG 13, only we have in Bangladesh 25% data. Life below water, SDGs goal 14, only 60% data we have. And for example, only SDGs 15, life on land, 57.1% data we have. But we have much more in future. We will do much more data, generating data. Environmental statistics and industrialization in BBS. At Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics published Bangladesh Disaster Statistics 2015, climate change and national disaster perspective. Total the statistics in fully it was engendering. BBS Bangladesh government established environment, climate change and disaster statistics cells for institutionalization process in Bangladesh as a regular basis. Government formed the Interministerial Technical Working Committee for producing environment, climate change and disaster statistics in BBS in 2016 and published the result of DRSF, Disaster Statistics Framework, with Fiji, Indonesia and Philippines and in close collaboration with UNSCAP, already been published in 2018 and published Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics published Bangladesh Environmental Statistics Framework 2016. It is a great framework and it has a 15 strategic goal. It's aligned with Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, United Nations Framework for Development Statistics, UNCIA, United Nations System of Environmental Economic Accounting, and our 5-year plan and we in this work in close partnership with UNDP and UNPI, published Bangladesh compilation of environmental statistics 2017 under the Bangladesh Environmental Statistics Framework, and already we have piloted the poverty environment accounts in close collaboration of UNPI. And for your kind information, we have in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a long history in gender and environment sides. Professor Dr. Mahbub Nasreen, Director Institute of, you all know that, Director Institute of Disaster Management and Vulnerability Studies, University of Dhaka, did a great work about the environment, climate change, disaster and gender integration since 25 years long. She has a long experience about this field. But in BBS, in the national organization, we started this works in 2014 and 15. But we have Bangladesh different institutions, universities, academics did the great work and integration with gender and other social inclusion. Strengthening environment statistics in Bangladesh. We have much more work on the basis of SDGs and Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and Paris and Bangladesh Vision 2021 and 7 5-year plan. Ladies and gentlemen, Bangladesh has recently implementation of the Strengthening Environment, Climate Change and Disaster Statistics projects for next 4 years timeline. The aim of this project is to generate environment, natural resource, biodiversity, climate change and disaster related data and information for institutionalization process of environmental statistics in Bangladesh, as well as integration of climate change adaptation, vulnerabilities and gender. Under this project, Bangladesh has initiated the next survey, namely Bangladesh Disaster Related Statistics 2020, Climate and Natural Disaster Perspective. We have a plan for conducting this survey in the first phase in January 2021. And another work already has started in collaboration of UN Women for implementing to strengthen the overall environment, climate change, disaster and gender-related statistics in individual level and household level in Bangladesh. Under this collaboration, BBS will implement the following three types of tasks: piloting of sex, age, disability, disaggregated data collection according to integration of climate change, adaptation, vulnerability, and gender at the 3 sub-districts in the most disaster vulnerable areas of Bangladesh. Already we have prepared a draft questionnaire for conducting pilot survey in the first quarter of 2021. We already in our hand this draft questionnaire, and publishing methodological guideline and protocol for the data producer and users for integrating gender and social inclusion in environment, climate change, and disaster statistics in Bangladesh within December 2020. Already we have prepared final draft. It will approve by the government. Already all meetings already been done. In this week, we hope the government will approve, and then we shall try to publish in the second week of in December 2020. These are great achievement, and it is the innovation work. And train up the interministerial agencies to 220 officials of field level on pilot basis for capacity building and generating climate change adaptation, vulnerabilities, and gender-related data and information. And you know that Bangladesh government has already initiated all types of disaster-related data and climate data. We are capturing by the mobile and web application for conducting BDRS. There's the sample survey questionnaire using sample survey and sex, age, and disaster-related disaster and disaggregated data in collaboration with UN Women. We all are using the digital platform for, we reduce the timeline. And a challenge for environmental policies and strategies. Environment, climate change, and disaster statistics field have various problems with accessibility, quality, and timeliness of data for environmental policies and strategies. You know that difficult to fix differences. There are many gaps in the environmental data. Some departments is collect administrative data from the field and some big data and some other various types of data we have in Bangladesh, but difficult to fix reference here and baseline on environmental statistics. Already we have set up two types of data as a baseline, the Bangladesh Disaster Statistics Framework. According to Bangladesh Disaster Statistics Framework, we conduct the Bangladesh Disaster-Related Statistics 2020, Climate and Natural Disaster Perspective. We fix a reference year 2009 to 2014, 2014 to 2020 already fixed, and complex the accountability among BBS and other sectoral agencies, organizations for accountability and designated focal points. Integration in national planning and process and development of institutional mechanism for implementation. COVID-19 pandemic situation for ECDS project and sex, age, and disability disaggregated data program implementation. These two types of program of BVS was to implement in the mid of 2020, June, July, but already we have failed. But we try to in this situation for conducting two types of survey in the field level with using health equipments and requirement for financials with technical assistance for developing environmental statistics methodology and new service and capacities with close collaboration with government departments, interagency, inter-ministry, or development partners. This is a challenge. And unexpected outcomes from the workshop, improving and strengthening the knowledge, understanding, and skills of SDGs metadata regarding national situation, environmental monitoring and management, and developing ability, integrity, cooperation, and coordination. This is the is a great thing about things for collecting data, environmental data. Environmental data, that means environment, climate change, biodiversity, natural resources, and so on. And this is a big challenge, and but we try to accommodate or try to arrange a much more arrange a meeting or workshop or training workshop with in collaboration with UNDP, UN Women, and other UN organizations try. And recommendation on strategic pathways and priority actions for multi-sectoral environmental data, monitoring, management, and reporting, and relating to the engendering and social inclusion. This is our expected outcomes from the workshop. And we shall try to, we hope, become a COVID-19 situation within we hope it will free from the world, and then we go to the field and generating SDGs data and gender and environment nexus data and prepare a report and distribute among the government and development partners for distributing these statistics. Thank you very much for cooperating, all of you.
Thank you, Rafiqul. That was really very insightful, and the important element there that you stressed around not just developing the methodology, but also training interministerial officers on the use of it. Thank you very much. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next two presenters and save questions for all of the presenters until the end. We're just running a little bit behind at the moment. So our next presenter, Mr. Hugh, is the Deputy Director of Disaster Management Policy and Technology Centre, Vietnam. He will speak on the centre's work on sex, age and disability disaggregated data for disaster monitoring system in Vietnam. Mr. Hugh, if you could please turn on your camera and unmute yourself, and you have the floor.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And so now I would like to make a presentation about the gender statistics for climate change action and the disaster risk reduction in Vietnam. And my presentation is focused about the achievement and challenges and solution for implement the statistic, gender statistic for the disaster risk reduction in Vietnam. The first is to the results obtained, achievement. Firstly, I think gender equality is also gender aspect have been integrated into the law of the disaster prevention and control in Vietnam. The gender equality is a main principle in the law of the disaster prevention. The second is to the gender aspect have been integrated in the strategy, legal document, and also guideline for the committee for disaster risk management. Gender aspect also is has been mentioned in the training material, communication for the community, especially for the commune rescue team. Junior is a local level. The commune rescue team is to I think it's the main force for to help to the people in the lower level, and therefore it's gender equality. Maybe I think it's improved through in this team. The development of the gender integration material in the committee disaster risk management. Another for the achievement is that now we are the development of the database for the social economics of serving for the disaster risk reduction, including to the assess of the indicator integrated to the gender issue. First of all, is the population capacity of the disaster risk reduction, production and business, water and environment, especially. I think it's the database is very important because it's long term. In Vietnam now have the database for the social economic for the disaster risk reduction. Therefore, it's a part is Vietnam where the decision maker is lack of this data and can, therefore cannot to foresee the, how to damage in the effect area where the disaster occurs. Therefore, now it's based on to the support from the women in Vietnam. Now we are to develop the database for the socio-economics for the disaster risk reduction. And also this data is now we are complete to get to the data is commune level is 2 or 3 province. I think I hope that in this year and next year we can get all the commune in Vietnam. Maybe it's 11,000 commune. I think this database is very important when for the decision maker when to develop to the disaster plan and also develop the disaster response plan. And also we are now to develop to the database for the statistics for the damage and also post-disaster needs assessment, including to the data for analysis of the gender, age, and also the risk group. Back to the database for the social economics for the disaster risk reduction, we are also separate to the gender, age, and also to the risk group. I think in this year we are to cooperate collaboration with the General Statistics Office of Vietnam to review indicator for disaster prevention and control. I saw it some a picture about to the database for social economic for the disaster risk reduction. I think this managed by the government agency, the central the steering committee for natural disaster prevention and control. Now we are this is the data for the Cà Mau province, and also this data is we can find out the data for the province, district, and even in commune level. We can see to the separate to the male and female population, the age group, and the risk group, and also to the provincial committee for this risk prevention and control, and also commune rescue team. Also, two database I mentioned before is now to integrate to the Vietnam disaster monitoring system. I think this system is now is the government in the central and also to the provincial is using this system. And this system is the data for the data for the economic, social economic, and also the damage database is also integrate inside the Vietnam disaster monitoring VNDMS. You can see in this this picture, it's when I find out the Cà Mau province in we have 9 district and 101 commune. You can see it's data in the Cà Mau province detained in the population and even population and production and even in the infrastructure inside in the Cà Mau province. The challenges and difficulty, firstly, is the capacity of the steering committee for disaster prevention and control is still limited. Therefore, they have recognized the importance is the gender analysis in transport disaster assessment. You know, the gender aspect have not been considered as important the factor is the government program and some project in program. The gender and data on gender also is considered as a task as a mission of one ministry and also the women union. The gender analysis in production and also the business, especially related to the damage after disaster, is difficult to separate and analysis. First of all, it's an analysis who is head of the household and who have a main income in the family. I think it's difficult. This issue very difficult for us to do. There have not been any mechanism for monitoring regulation on the gender analysis. I propose some solution. Firstly, it's a develop and the continue and develop and integration of the database for the social economic for the risk reduction, the database for the statistic on the damage and post disaster. Also integrate in the VDMS. As you know, it's the database, two database just to develop. Therefore, now I try to collect more data in whole country and also integrate to the DMS. The collaboration with the General Statistic Office of the Vietnam to come to agreement on the indicator of the disaster prevention and control, including that gender. The collaboration to develop the project and submit to the government, integrate to the indicator into the activity of the statistic of the gender as a General Statistic Office in Vietnam. The training to develop the gender related to capacity for the government staff on the disaster prevention and control, especially for the lower level commune and lower level, especially for the commune rescue team. The integrate gender indicator into the relational program. So thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much. And the importance of the development of the database, I think, can't be underestimated. And it's really also very interesting to see that it goes down to the district and commune level, which is very important. As I mentioned previously, we're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to move to our next presenter and then we'll take questions at the end. Our next presenter is Le Thi Tan Huynh. Huynh is a senior technical analyst, a technical advisor for Center for Environment and Community Research in Vietnam. Huynh works in areas of environmental management and climate change, now focusing on waste management and gender issues. She has over 25 years of working experience with various international development organizations, and she'll be sharing with us on quantifying the contribution of women to climate change mitigation through waste management. If you could please turn on your camera and unmute yourself, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to have this opportunity to share about the tool used to quantifying contribution of women to climate change mitigation through the waste management activities. Do you see my screen sharing? I didn't see it.
We do see your screen, Huynh, but it's what we're seeing is a black page. So
oh yes, I don't know why, because when I tap it's okay. Let me check again. Sorry. Okay. Okay. What's the problem?
Miss Huen, this is Rina from UN Women. I can show your slides in the screen in my end.
Okay,
If
fine.
that works.
I think we got maybe some technical problem.
So please just let me know next slide when you want me to go.
So now second slide, please. My presentation consists of 5 parts. Introduction, tool for quantifying women contribution to GHG emission, and what's the figure like, and who and how to use the tool, and the last one is recommendation. Next slide, please. You may know that many studies indicate that the women play an important role in the entire waste value chain, and through that they can contribute to the climate change mitigation or GHG reduction. Here are some figures from CECR study in 2019. About 90% of participants of waste segregation at shore projects are women, and 80 to 90% of waste collector and picker, that means informal sector, are women, and about 50% of small and medium enterprise who work for recycling are owned or led by the woman. But how to recognize and strengthen the important role of the woman in the waste management? How to calculate how to calculate the woman contribute directly to GHG reduction, and also we need the evidence-based data to inform the policy and national programming. Based on this, we think about our project, think about how to develop a simple tool to quantify the contribution of women-led waste management project to GHG reduction and climate change mitigation. Next slide, please. Our project team have developed a tool based focus on waste reduction, separation, collection, and recycling by the household and by informal sector. Our development process for the tool including the 5 steps. First, we conduct the survey and collect data on waste reduction, separation, collection, and recycling. Then we review the relevant document to select suitable GHG emission reduction factor, then establish formula and design the tool accordingly. Based on the tool, we test the tool with the collected data from the field project, then adjust and finalizing tool. The tool structure consists of 4 Excel sheets. The first, it is a GHG reduction by reduction consumption of single-user plastic product. So for this one, we need the data input is the number of people stop user 1 to 4 single-use plastic product, implementation criteria, and then output data will be automatically calculated by the tool is the avoided emission of kilogram CO2 equivalent during implementation time. The second sheet is the GHG reduction by waste separation at household. We need the input data is the number of household implement the waste separation and number of household collect organic waste for composting and volume of each waste category separated and time period. Then the tool can calculate automatically the avoided GHG emission during the implementation time and also the cost reduction cost for waste management. The third tool is regarding to also at the household level, but it is a simplified formula based on our field data. So for this tool, we need only the input data is the number of household implement waste segregation and number of household do the organic waste for composting. And we also have the output data similarly. The last tool is to calculate GHG reduction by the informal sector through their collection and recycling waste. So based on which only need the number of the waste collector in the local and the implementation period, then the tool can calculate the avoided GHG emission by the work of waste picker or collector during the implementation time. The next slide, please. So here you can see the appearance of the tool. I'm sorry that this is in Vietnamese only. So the tool includes the 4 Excel sheets like that. Here I put only 3 for limited screen. You can see the all of input data will be put provided in the purple cell, and the output data will be automatically calculation in the green cell like that. So number 1, number 2, number 4. Here I know number 3. So next slide, please. Applying this tool to the data obtained from the project non-plastic ocean by CECR in Da Nang implemented into 2019, and yeah, we have quite impressive figure. Yes, each month a household can help to avoid about 73 kilograms CO2 of emission from separate and compost organic waste, and they also can help to avoid 13 kilograms CO2 of emission from separation of recyclable waste, and reduce of cost for waste collection, transportation, and treatment about the 6,000 Vietnamese dollars this per month. What it means that? It means that if 1 million households do separate waste at shore, they can help to avoiding 13,000 tons of CO2 per month if they do separate recyclable waste. And if they do the collect the organic waste and do composting, they can also help to avoid 73 tons of CO2 every month. It is quite impressive, because if we know that we can do something simple like a separate waste at shore, we can help a lot to reduce GHG emission from the waste management sector. Similarly, each informal woman waste collector can contribute to reduce the avoid the emission of 4.7 tons of CO2 equivalent per month, or 57 tons of CO2 per year from the collecting recyclable waste. Next slide, please. How this tool can be used? It can use to quantify the contribution of the waste reduction and recycling project to the GHG emission reduction and climate change mitigation. It can help to estimate the GHG reduction potential for new projects as well as to identify the waste category with high reduction potential, such that it can make for better priority and proper programming. Yeah. And then we can also, based on this tool, it can also provide the good evidence fact figure for effective information, education, and communication program. Who can use this? This could be any NGO or other organization who implement waste separation reduction project. It could be local authority and policy maker or research institute. Next slide, please. Here are some of our recommendations. First, we strongly encourage organizations to use this tool to convert the work of women in waste management to their contribution to GHG reduction. And also, we recommend CECR and UN Women in Vietnam continue to work with Climate Ministry to formalize the contribution of the woman to GHG reduction. For the NDC in Vietnam, use this quantified figure. And maybe policy advocacy could be more effective to recognize role of informal sector in waste management and to create the favorable condition for their access to the policy on social, on health insurance, and improve their working environment, because they are, we know that they contribute a lot to the waste management sector, but so far their contribution not formally recognized, and they are work in very bad working conditions without any access to social or health insurance. And maybe the project can consider to further develop this Excel tool into an IT application for better user, for more user friendly, or we can extend this tool to other aspects of waste management, or even for other aspects like for energy saving project which led by the woman, so on. Next, please. I would like to finish my presentation here, and thank you very much for your attention. And sorry for technical problem.
Thank you. The technical problem was easily solved. So thank you very much. And you know, the very important points towards the end here on the importance of data in the context of the informal sector as well as formal sector, and how important that is in being able to for those who are working in that sector to be formally included in policy responses. And also a good point about the use of this data in the country's NDC. So we are going to open briefly for questions for all three of our presenters. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, if you could either put it in chat, or you can raise your hand, and if you can indicate who your question is to. The other point is that if you do have questions, you can put them in chat, and the presenters can also respond to them in chat. If you'd like to make a remark, if you can keep it very short, please. Prakriti from Arrow, if you would like to turn on your camera and share your comment, but if you could keep it brief, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'll need like a few seconds. Arrow is also engaged with UN Women in the Empower project. So we conducted scoping studies in the 3 countries to understand the capacity needs of CSOs. One of the emergent needs was to enhance technical capacities on accessing, using and collecting gender segregated data. So if I have to report some numbers from Vietnam and Bangladesh, then 2/3 of the organizations that we approached in both these countries, they said that they are not very comfortable on this front or reported below average capacity to use gender data or to inform new research around it. So what we feel is that there is immense scope in terms of enhancing not just the total data that is available, but also the quality of data for policymakers. If the capacities of local CSOs in using data, in collecting data, and disseminating data is enhanced. So really, thanks to the speakers for bringing up in some way or the other this point, which we feel is completely important, and which also came up in our studies. Thanks.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I'm not seeing any other questions at this stage. But again, if you have questions as you go along, or if you think of something, you can put that in chat and we can respond to it, or the speakers can respond to that directly. If there are no questions at this point, then I think we can move to the next opportunity for participants to share with us some of their views. Using Mentimeter, if you go to menti.com or click in the link that's in the chat and use the code 6168665, you'll come up with the next Menti question, which will be shared on screen in a moment. So the question this time round is, what are the challenges in producing gender data in climate change and disasters? And so far what we have are 2 things that have also been raised in the presentation, so not seen as an important priority, and that the capacities are low. And also the issue of funding and finance, the access to gender data, the lack of human resources, coordination and harmonization, which was also something that came up as a recurring theme in the presentations, was in relation to the need for interministerial coordination. Okay, so often not directly linked to project activities. The issue of humanitarian responses and the urgency of those, and so perhaps that speaks to the need to have frameworks and things in place in anticipation. Collaboration with stakeholders, so that the challenge of actually collaborating. Too many competing priorities for under-resourced statistical systems. A lack of coordination and collaboration. So again, the importance here of the need to collaborate and coordinate, and a lack of technical solutions. And perhaps that's something that can be explored a little further on whether the technical solutions perhaps are in fact there. It's just a question of knowing who to speak to or where to find them. It's not scrolling, so I'm not sure if there are any inputs further down, but there are also there's also 2 questions in the chat around in relation to earlier presentations. So one of them was whether or not the links to the databases and applications that were spoken about in Rafiqul and Huey's presentations could be shared. And if you'd like to do so and are able to do so, you can either do so in the chat or you can share that with the organizers and we can share that with participants. Okay, so some additional things here around people producing data don't know how to disaggregate. So again, this is the capacity in this case of the person gathering the data, lack of high-level expert in data processing within these areas, consolidating data losses, so not disaggregated at source. Coordination with stakeholders can be poor. Operational versus official statistics, low government involvement, and there's definitely a need for government involvement in this case. Qualitative data and narratives are not given enough importance. So there's a number of themes coming out of this around the need for coordination and cooperation at all levels, the importance of capacity building and capacities within those who are gathering and producing, and ensuring that people understand the importance of this so that it is embedded and isn't an add-on, it's seen as being relevant. So thank you very much to all of our presenters who have provided us with a really comprehensive overview of the production of gender statistics. And I'm just checking to see if we are actually going to take a break. And we are going to do so, if we're going to do so, we're going to do so just for a moment to give everyone, okay, no break. So we will move on then to our next session, where we're going to change the perspective a little to have the four speakers will be speaking about the user experience of gender data. Each speaker has, again, 10 minutes to present, after which there'll be a few. We will do the same thing that we've done this time. We'll take a couple of presenters and then we'll take the question and answer. But you can be putting your questions in the chat as we go along, and you can use the raise hand feature. So our first presenter in this session on using statistics on the environment and gender nexus is Alice Takena. Alice is a research community officer at Kiribati campus of the University of the South Pacific. And Alice will be speaking on understanding women's resilience in Kiribati. If you could please turn on your camera and unmute yourself. Alice, you have the floor.
Thank you, Fleur. How's my voice?
Very good.
Okay.
Clear.
So, well, good evening and community, ladies and gentlemen. Please let me start this presentation now. Most of you have heard from our big brother Fiji from Pacific. Thank you, Vasiti Soko. And unlike Kiribati is a very small country, but with 23 small islands altogether. The islands are mainly coral atolls with one raised coral limestone island of Banat. We have an elected government. The president is the head of the state. Sea level rise is our main concern. And although we have only less than 4 meters, the highest point in our country, we are really facing a high risk of sea flooding. And still we are free of cyclones, but very vulnerable to storm surges and overtopping. We have limited natural resources and porous soil, but have a high human resource. We have less emission of greenhouse gas. And so climate change is our concern, and it is a concern for the Kiribati population of more than 100 people at the 2010 census. I've been asked to contribute to this presentation, and the topic of my talk is looking at women resilience in Kiribati. Please, next slide. Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to present my own understanding as an Kiribati woman, an educator, and another CEO or research community officer working for the University of the South Pacific based in Kiribati, USP Kiribati campus. These are some of the work that I have done and experienced throughout my time working for climate change. And so understanding gender and climate change in the islands of Kiribati would be very different from all perspectives that you have heard, because it has a very diverse environment based on the location of the islands. And one of the, even that, the women, men are still feeling enthusiastic to learn more about climate change when you come to their communities. And as you can see in the photo there, that is one of the recent activities we are doing through European Union funding at USP Global Climate Change Alliance, plus Scaling Up Pacific Adaptation. And those are the participants graduating with a certificate of achievement for this climate change capacity building. And that is the outline of my presentation, looking at the climate change and women in Kiribati, my own work and experience, and looking at quantitative and qualitative data. And then what are the way forward from our perspective. Thank you. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, statistically, this is, I took it from the, you can access this information. And as you can see on the column in the, from the 20 years back, we have an increasing population. At this time, we are very much interested in the number of male and females for the whole country. And for your information, the 2020 census for Kiribati is going on now, meaning starting from the 7th of November, a few weeks back, and it will complete on the 27th of November this month, a few days left. So while it is going on, then the figures to be confirmed once the census for 2020 is finished. And this is the right time for the looking at the importance of gender statistics. And as I have time to talk with the National Census, the National Statistics officer in charge, she talked about the new approach that they are using for this 2020 census. Most of the enumerators, all of them are using the tablets where they have they collect the data on the field, and when it goes wrong, the tablet or the icon will turn red, showing that there is a mistake. So they will refer back to the organizers or the people from the main office. Everyone can access each other's tablet, and then they try again to correct the information they are collecting on the spot or on the field. So that is a very innovative way for producing quality data for Kiribati for this 2020 census. And we are very fortunate to have that tablets to assist all the enumerators for confirming and producing a quality data from their quantitative side. So not all, even that, I also have time to ask whether or what kind of information, and the statistician or the Republic statistician woman mentioned that they don't collect data that is not under the, or are not being informed earlier during the questionnaire design, but that is where they could provide only certain information. However, this is not a shortcoming from their end, but this gives us the importance of collecting qualitative data as researchers in the same context for Kiribati. And so this will help us to provide both quantitative and qualitative data for a good information, a good set of information for the country, for policymakers, and maybe for educators, researchers, and all other stakeholders. Moving on to the next slide, please. Rina. Okay, coming back to the culture of in our daily lives in Kiribati. It's a very interesting part of the talk tonight too, because you might have different roles at your places, but this is what looks like a general custom or a general way of how women behave in society. Look at the women's work and contribution. Most at home, women do most voluntary work and silent work, but even that, it contributes for the sustainability of the livelihoods of their immediate family members. This has been experienced throughout Kiribati, from the very north to the very southern islands, and across to the Line and Phoenix group. This is, we call it the contribution from where it includes their bringing of the family, the children, and looking after the food, involved in the agricultural, and involved in the caretaking of the infants, and every work, even though they are soft, but they have they play a major role in the sustainability of the homes. Looking at the community level, they are, most of the time they are silent because they do not have a chance to express themselves culturally, but they are drivers of change. They have silent minds that they often exchange it to their husbands and family members for them to do the activities. And so they also take initiatives and do the rollout on outcomes expected from them and from every communities. At the village level, they are silent decision makers. They are also knowledgeable, skillful, and strong individuals, and they are backbone of all decisions made at the Manebe. The Manebe is a meeting house where all the men made the decision, but even that, behind the scene, women could have a discussion or a sharing of information and knowledge with their husbands before they leave for the meeting. So in that way, they are silent decision makers. Looking at the national level and the many changes that Kiribati has undergone, or it's a rapid change. Looking at the education level, and educated women are key players in all government and non-government bodies for the nation, region, and at international level. Sometimes we don't look at education as something important, but as an educated woman, this makes us, it empowers women for their involvement in these government and non-government bodies and in decision making. So In Kiribati, education is also empowering women to take their new seats in the Parliament House, to take their new seats in the decision making, and also to take new seats at all levels nationally and further to the region. So this is a good point from them. Moving on to the next slide. I hope it's my last slide. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, and those are some of the work that we have done, activities from the University of the South Pacific in the Scaling Up Pacific Adaptation Project. We are focusing on mainstreaming climate change and disaster risk and risk reduction for all communities working at the subnational or island council level. We are also taking into account the people-centered approach, where we include men and women, families, youth, disabled, and to build the capacities to all of them, all participants that are in our training. And if you can see that Kiribati has a large area of sea, and the 23 islands are dispersed across the equatorial area. This has proven our diversities by all means. Rural and urban diversities, educated and non-educated, employed, non-employed, northern and then central and southern Kiribati islands. So issues in production of climate change and disaster context.
Alice,
Yes.
we need to, thank you for your presentation. If you could please wrap up in the next moment.
Okay, and then the way forward is to have a Kiribati Risk Index to have for the whole country. And thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you have get my message. Thank you, and the next slide is just, I think I finished everything. Thank you, Fleur. My apologies.
No, thank you. And the presentations will be shared with all participants.
It's that's the last.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing the experience in Kiribati. It's useful to see the details of culture and the importance of that in the work that needs to be done. Our next presenter is Soma Datta. Soma is a social economist from Energia, the International Network on Gender and Sustainable Energy. She is working on development issues surrounding energy access, poverty, and gender. She has been supporting policymakers, utilities, program practitioners, governments, NGOs, and international organizations in Asia and Africa. She has led and supported initiatives on women's entrepreneurship in the energy sector and in mainstreaming gender and social inclusion into energy projects, policies, and programs. Soma will speak on mainstreaming gender with energy access statistics. Soma, you have the floor.
Thank you, Flo. Okay, so I should share my screen. Do you see it?
Yes, we do. If you could go into presentation mode.
Yes, I will. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Like said, my name is Soma Datta and I'm representing Energia here today. Energia is an international network that works on sustainable energy, issues related to sustainable energy and gender. And Energia is very thankful to be part of this important meeting and to present our experiences. So it was established in '96 and now currently it has partners in 15 countries in Asia and Africa. And the idea really was to create an institutional base for mainstreaming gender equality and women's empowerment into the traditional energy sector, which is, traditionally considered to be a fairly power plant driven and not so much of not dealing with so much of softer issues of gender, social inclusion, poverty, and all of that. So just a bit of introduction to Energia. Energia works on a comprehensive set of 5 areas. One is women's economic empowerment, which is essentially trying to reach energy access services, whether it is cook stoves or solar devices and so on, to the last mile communities. And by last mile, we really mean the resource poor people who are living in remote areas through developing women entrepreneurs. The second area is that of gender mainstreaming, which is supporting the integration of gender considerations into energy sector policies and programs. The third one is to work with the policy sector, intergovernmental processes to ensure that gender and energy both get reflected in, for example, climate change discussions, for example, poverty reduction discussions, and so on. Networking is basically the way of working for Energia. It has a large partnership base in the countries that it works in, but it also works at a global level with international partners. And finally, research, and this is where data is a big part. Actually, data is a part of all of that we do, though I must confess that we don't really work at the national levels with big databases, statistics and databases conducted through the National Bureau of Statistics. So what I'm going to be sharing, in fact, is not so much from that perspective, but more of why it is important to look at gender statistics when we're talking of energy access. So what is it that we collect in gender data? If you look at SDG 7, which is on energy, we collect data on population with access to energy, electricity. So basically a household is connected, not connected. Population with primary reliance on clean fuels and technology. So for cooking energy, what is it they're using? If they're using biomass, which is fuel wood and cow dung cakes in some cases, and that kind of thing, or they've actually moved to what is called the modern energy, modern fuels, which would be things like biogas, would be electricity, would be LPG, and in some cases improved cook stoves as well. But it's a very binary sort of data collection. It is whether they have it or whether they don't have, that's about it. It is definitely not disaggregated by sex. So there is, the standard data collection does not have information on whether they're receiving and using energy services. What I mean by that is that you may have an electricity connection in a household or a village, but you may be getting 2 hours of electric supply, right? And if you're not getting it at the time that you need, say, for sending children to school in the mornings or in the evenings, then it's not that good. It also lacks recognition of women's energy needs and their contribution and the distribution of control over energy resources. So like I said, oftentimes women want energy. Cooking energy is a big area of interest of women. The men may not be interested in that. So that sort of differentiation does not get captured in the standard binary data collection processes. It all, like I said, it also collects, lacks recognition of the final benefits. So one is, like I said, you may have electricity for 2 hours in a day. A woman may want it, for her, the primary need may be to lift water and get drinking water at home. For the rest of the household, it may be entertainment, televisions. So that kind of distinction does not get captured in standard data collection methods. Now, what is the implication? The implication is that oftentimes the national energy policies do not consider such aspects, such softer aspects. And what we do see is that majority of the national energy policies actually considered women as beneficiaries of energy services, which they are like anyone else. And sometimes as stakeholders, so the women's groups are called to stakeholder meetings and that kind of thing. But very rarely they actually identify women as agents of change, which is rather ironical because in the last decade or so, we do see a large number of organizations working on women's enterprises together with the private sector to really reach the difficult locations. Now, if the policy does not recognize this, and why it does not recognize it is because there's no data showing it. So again, the importance of gender data. If the policy does not recognize it, then this is never going to become a central policy focus. So what are the consequences of this gender neutral, people would call it, but it's as good as gender blind energy policies? Firstly, what are we're talking about big numbers. We're talking here about 1.2 billion people who don't have access to electricity, but much more than that, more than 3 billion. And in fact, right now after COVID, this number has even increased further. 3 billion people who don't have access to clean cooking. And 60% of these people who are actually dying of premature death because of not having access to clean cooking are women and children. 85% of the 840 million who are collecting fuel wood are women and girls. So these sorts of things are not getting captured. So like I said, the global strategy to clean cooking is not working. It's impacting women and children severely. Women's workers and businesses are especially impacted by this. Why? Because women's enterprises are often small, they are not registered, and they don't get captured in the national statistics on energy access. As a result, the national policies and frameworks on climate change as well as energy incorporate very limited commitments to decentralized renewable energy, which can solve some of the problems that we're talking about it. Several speakers before me also said that, which I agree with, is that women are underrepresented in leadership positions in energy and climate actions, and yeah, in climate policy as well. Next one. So just a bit of a glimpse of what Energia has done with data. So we just finished a big research program on gender disaggregated research on energy and gender in 12 countries with conducted 11,000 interviews, RCTs, large number of in-depth interviews, and basically in all of these countries tried to use the national energy statistics as a base, but going beyond that to see what is it that the data is not capturing, what is the story which the data is not capturing. So just one or two things I'd like to share with you. The first finding, there were several, and I've just picked up 2 or 3 here. The first is that the women's businesses and enterprises tend to benefit less from electrification. Now, why is it so? Like I did mention briefly, women's enterprises are smaller, they are informal, they use less electricity than men, as a result of which interventions like rural electrification automatically do not end up benefiting women and men at the same level. And this we saw repeatedly country after country and in large database, in large sample sizes. The second finding that we had is that the impact of energy access is just reaching energy or reaching electricity is not enough. It is also affected by what kind of appliances are you able to purchase and invest in and purchase. So are you actually able to buy a small solar, not necessarily small solar, but are you able to invest in, let's say, home-based mixers, grinders, agriculture producing equipment, and so on. So there's a whole lot of complementary inputs that are required, especially which actually are difficult for women to acquire at times, which affect how you're able to use energy services. We also saw, and this is very, very important and has a very strong policy implication, is that when women earn an income, we see positive impacts at multiple levels. I think all of us do experience it, but this graph that you see on the screen, which documents the number of minutes per week of children's study time, shows very clearly that in households where women had control over income because they were involved in an energy project, that was significantly higher. We also see women investing very much in, of course, children's education, health, and as a result, in the long-term well-being of households. We have similar findings on subsidies. India, for example, has a very large program on subsidies on LPG subsidies. Now we have big numbers running into several millions of LPG gas cylinders which have been distributed. Now, if you look at that data, which is, like I said, a binary data of have and have not, then it's a great number to have. When you go beyond that and actually start talking to women about whether they're using it or not, then we find that the number of cylinders that women are actually able to afford every year, that is the number of refills, is much, much, much less than planned. And it's actually gone severely down after COVID because of the loss in livelihoods. So again, this sort of data on a regular basis is not being collected. What we do have is occasional studies, in-depth studies, which show these kind of results, but not too often. So the overarching conclusion of what I'm saying, what we're missing in data is that because we don't have data on energy access, on gender disaggregated data on energy access, so we're not really able to see the full policy implications. And one of the policy implications is that the universal energy goals, that is to reach everyone by 2030, is not likely to be met until these needs are taken into account. Okay, this is my last slide. So so just to say, now there are organizations like the World Bank's multi-tier framework, then we have the Clean Cooking Alliance, Energia, who are actually working towards gender disaggregation in energy data and service and indicators, but we still have a long way to go. I mean, firstly, we have to make sure that the data and statistics that's available is actually feeding into policy in a way. So collecting the correct data, putting it out to the policymakers in a language that makes sense to everyone is a big thing. The second point is that we need further disaggregated gender disaggregated indicators for energy. The kinds of things that I mentioned in my previous slides are not getting captured anywhere. There's also a very strong need to bring out a link between SDG 7, SDG 5, actually several SDGs. We also need to build alliances and capacities of the monitoring units, along with the National Bureaus of Statistics, to make sure that this happens. And finally, of course, there's a need to increase the investments and finance on gender disaggregated energy data and statistics in energy sector, in energy access, but more broadly, of course, in the whole environment sector. So that is all I will say at this moment. Questions are most welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Soma. And I thank you very much also for not only showing us what the challenge is, but showing some very clear points for the way forward. And again, we're seeing some recurring themes on the need for the data to not only be gathered, but to be shared and used effectively. And the need for building alliances is certainly an important one. We can take questions now for Alice and for Soma. There is a question in chat, which I will just read out, which is around spatial data. So this is to Soma and to Alice, but to anyone else as well who can also respond in chat. Any thoughts on or ideas on how disaggregated data collection can benefit from spatial data? And is spatial data being used, and are there any opportunities?
So spatial, I can start. Spatial data in energy sector has really not been used at the household level. It has been used in terms of forestry and biomass use, but hardly any for the energy sector. So we don't really have that. And actually, at the scale that I'm talking about, at household level, I don't see that much use, other than perhaps having clusters of where it's, where the access is less. But you could have things like such clustering linked with geographical remoteness. So that would be helpful. And then say geographical remoteness or a cluster that is unelectrified or unlikely to be electrified. And if you could have a sort of mapping of the biomass resources available not too far from it, you could have a mapping of other solar and hydro resources available, then you could perhaps map it. But it has not really been used that much for energy access mapping so far.
Thank you for that response, Norma. And there's also a request there if those research results are published anywhere, and if so, if you could share that the link or where that information can be found.
Yes, indeed. I will just find the link and put it in the chat box here in a moment.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You might want to have a look at, sorry, Alice, yes.
All right. The one suggestion from me is to answer to Ramona, please. One of the using those spatial data is because they are related to the map, and these they use the GPS because it will relate the data on the map to so that's how they can be used. And in another situation, it is it can be used for, like we benefit from these by linking spatial data with other sources like out population census and household surveys. It could help us to produce. So I hope this will help you answer the question for now. Thank you for that question.
Thank you very much, Alice, for your response. Okay, so we will then, I think, move on to our next speaker. Our next presenter is Srijana Shrestha. Srijana is the Undersecretary, Climate Change Management Division, Ministry of Forests and Environment in Nepal. She has contributed to the preparation of the National REDD+ Benefit Sharing Plan Emission Reduction Program document, ERPD, and in the formulation of National Climate Change Policy in 2019. She is committed to contributing to sustainable forest management, gender sensitization, and GESI integration in the forestry sector and climate change, and will speak on gender analysis supporting national policy development. You have your camera on, so if you can unmute yourself, please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you for the floor. Namaste and greetings from the Nepal. Today here I'm going to share about some efforts and challenges in gender integrations and analysis. In Nepal, forest sector can be considered as one of the most progressive sector when it comes integrating gender and social inclusion in forest sector and as well as climate change. I would like to mention about some policy strategies and that related to climate change that incorporate the genders like 15 plant, forest sector, gender and social inclusion strategy, forest sector strategy, national adaptation plan, program of action, Nepal National REDD+ strategy, local adaptation plan of action framework 2019. But the most important is the recent National Climate Change Policy 2019, which has recognized the need to integrate gender and social inclusion through its objective to mainstream GESI into adaptation and mitigation programs. And similarly, we have an Environment Protection Act 2019 that have a provision to ensure the representation of women experts and academia from environment and climate change sector in the Environment Protection and Climate Change Management National Council. Besides having these progressive policies and strategies, these policies and strategies are being implemented, although there are huge challenges in rolling out these. We have some institutional elements like gender working group for forest, environment and climate change and gender focal points. And we have conducted several gender integration training, workshop and assessment, either jointly or in collaboration with the civil society organizations. Several large climate change project and program have also a specific component backed by budget and human resources. Moreover, the different platforms are created to discuss on how GSC can be effectively integrated, and such as the gender group within the forest sector, female forester network, that is formal and informal networks, and also there's a practice of making it mandatory to include gender expert in most of the large assessment program planning. And mandatory consultation and inclusion of different interest groups such as Women Network, IPs Network, NIFIN, MIF, Dalit Network, etc. In forestry sector, particularly in community forestry, equal participation, gender-sensitive policies, planning, decision-making, and benefit sharing is under focused and found effective for the women leadership development. I personally engaged in the gender integration in Red Cross and the ERP in Nepal, that is supported by the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, World Bank, and assisted by the WCAN, which highlighted the key and emerging gender issues in Red Cross and forest sector, and provided a recommendation and an action plan, and guided the ERPD and Forest Investment Plan. Similar, the benefit sharing plan for Red Cross, which had a gender and IP expert in the team and ensured that gender and IP issue are specifically looked into. But we have the policies, strategies, but we have also some major challenges in the use of gender statistics in the climate change. I would like to mention some of the challenges here. That's the collection and management of gender and social inclusion disaggregate data base and institution of it in the database system. These are major challenges, and the gender analysis mostly project-based and internalization is still lacking. And another thing is that capacity gap to integrate gender in policy, planning, and budgeting, and using the gender statistics. Sometimes we want to, or some staff still want to integrate gender in policy, but the capacity gap and how to integrate skill is lacking here. And the lack of gender integration in policy and program and implement processes is still lacking in different sector also. Similarly, the gender disaggregated data for effective planning and implementation is also lacking, and the monitoring of implementation in the field and how to reach, include, and benefit the most excluded vulnerable group in the key issue. And the policy and strategies are yet to be translated in the field. We have a policy strategy, but its implementation is very important and it's still lacking here. And the skill and knowledge of the staff on finding the importance of gender issue and how to collect how to collect the data, disaggregate data for the gender is also lacking, particularly of the frontliner staff. Still, they want to do that, but this is the lacking here. And together with this challenge, we have incorporated the gender and social inclusion as a component in the draft enhanced NDCs and the ongoing NAP activities and other climate change related programs. Beside this, I want to mention some of the way forward and conclusion that we need to plan and dedicate target to gender budget directly to invest in the system of gender database from the intersectionality lens. Only the sex disaggregated data is not sufficient. We need to look from the intersectionality lens so that the vulnerable communities and the affected groups can be identified and the issues could be addressed effectively. And we should institutionalize the system gender data management and also a system to manage the knowledge generated, to use it in planning and monitoring, and also make it accessible to the wider public. Still, we have we are lacking the separate dedicated grant budget and budget for the integration of for the implementation of gender and the separate dedicated portal for the gender database. So Another, I want to say that we should strengthen the knowledge and skill on using the gender statistics and analyze from the gender statistics. Still, if we have a data in the gender also, but still we need to know how to use it and how to take it to the concerned people, how to make it accessible to the wider public level. And another most important thing is that I already also mentioned that the separate portal for gender statistics for the gender data is also the important one, and we should focus on it. But there are lots of challenge to implement such a necessary and important step to take this step. But we must still should be committed to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, there are some recurring themes, and the importance of it being an intersectional and not only related to sex disaggregated data, that there are other aspects that need to be taken into account, and the need for integration and for being able to share this information more broadly, and the needs around that. So thank you. And I'm going to move on to our next presenter, and then we can take some questions again after the next presentation. So thank you very much. And moving now to His Excellency Taejun Chun Hak from Cambodia. He's the Director General of Gender Equality and Economic Development in the Ministry of Women's Affairs in Cambodia. His main function is to lead technical advisory and coordination within the ministry and among the government institutions, academics, institutions, CSOs, private sector and international organizations for gender mainstreaming and of women's empowerment in good governance and economic development across government policy and reform programs. Today, he will be sharing with us on mechanisms for identifying and meeting the demand for gender data on climate change and disasters and the lessons learned in Cambodia. And I see the presentation is up, so if you could please unmute and share your camera if you would like to. You have the floor.
Thank you for the floor. For floor, allow me to share you the view from Cambodia. In my point, I will more focus on a little bit on the macro level, on what we are doing and what we experience on gender statistics and in the perspective of the users. As some of you may already know that first, I would like to share you briefly about our Ministry of Women's Affairs job, and it's linked to what the gender statistics work around. We are the ministry who play a role as the catalyst and advocate to work with the institution and stakeholder on how to engage gender mainstreaming. So gender statistics is very important for us to work as the advocates, and also we work to coordinate with the line ministry and with the stakeholder on how to mainstreaming across the government policy and the program. So we are not just only use the data to develop our own strategic plan and gender mainstreaming strategic plan, but also how to mainstreaming gender in the sectoral plan as well and the policy. And the number 3 is about we work on monitoring. So you already know that monitoring policy program data and statistics is very important for that. And working on that around, we have a technical working group on gender, and then how to coordinate and more practical working around this topic. We work through the technical working group on gender in Cambodia. So my outline of the slide and the sharing this topic will go to 4 points. One is about how to link between gender data and policy development in Cambodia, and also I will move to number 2 very quick to how to link with also very specific to the gender statistics and climate action. and we'll share you our view on some challenges, and also what the next step on gender in general, and also climate change in specific topics. So for us, for the gender statistic ecosystem, I would also move in 4 points, which is number 1 is about we work with the national product that in Cambodia we have, like Jessica just mentioned, that we have a national institute of statistics. So the national product will lead by them, and we are working with them on how to mainstreaming and make the questionnaire and the survey, national survey, more gender responsive, and also how to use that also when they produce the data, the data or statistic and survey. And number 2 is about when we talk about sectoral, there is also some ministry and sector, they also have their own product and data, which is also where we can work more on how to get the gender statistic and also how to mainstreaming gender as well. And of course, yes, number 3 is about specific research and study. That is very important that we can find more view and also can find more analysis on how the gender issue and the root cause of the gender issue in each sector as well. And number 4 is about administrative statistics. That is also we highlight on how to work with the administrative at line ministry and also at the subnational, it's called local level. So to link with that statistics, it's about how we inform to the policy development implementation. So in Cambodia, we use that all ecosystem as much as they have, and also as much as we learn that we can, the gap that we can also improve for the next. It's about to develop and formulate the national policy. And also right now, of course, we are drafting the gender national policy on gender equality. It is also very important when we move around, we find a way that we can put more specific, but also where we is a gap, we can also suggest in the policy and how to improve that system on gender responsive statistics as well. And we also use that for the our 5-year strategic plan that we call the Riratana Gender Equality and Women Empowerment Strategic Plan. So it's very important because we want to be more specific, we want to be more concrete. So the more we see where the specific statistic and the data provide, it's very important for us to develop the very concrete action plan for that, addressing the issue. And the number 3 is about we engage with the sectoral policy and program. So again, like what I said, we use that all for ecosystem to promote our gender work in working with the sectoral plan and strategic, and also of course for the local level they have development plan, they have development investment. So it's very important, you know, when we work with the line with the local authority, the more that they have that, it's very helpful for them to invest more specific to address the specific issue. So this is very general on the macro link between the gender statistic data and the policy development. So allow me to move a little bit very brief to what the gender statistic for climate action. That so far in 2014, we start to have one chapter on gender assessment on climate change among other subjects. But let me share you very brief that when we start to look at that gender assessment on the chapter on climate change, mostly there is very limited of data in Cambodia specific on gender. So mostly we are on how to use the global and how to use the very broad information in order to start our work. So later on also we use the policy brief that developed supported by the Empower project also in Cambodia in 2019, and also we also use the Cambodia Women Resilient Index as well from the project that support from the UN Women. So this round we also come up with the very specific serve us a lot for working with our national climate change counterpart, Ministry of Environment, and also the National Council for Sustainable Development, in order to make their national program and strategic plan on climate change, and also our counterpart with the disaster risk management on how to make this strategic plan gender responsive. And also, like what I said, in the national policy on gender equality, we also use that in order to have one specific chapter on how to promote gender and climate change, as well as the national strategic plan on gender and women empowerment. We have one specific priority among the national gender key priority as well. And as well, in addition, we also have the master plan on gender and climate change as well. For this is the idea, this is the input that we learn from what we have in the experience that we produce in Cambodia. So of course, like what I said, very general in our view, where we have the concrete, where we have the idea more to do that. So that's why we often for the climate change and also in the new topic, we often do not have concrete data when we develop a new policy. So basically, we use the global and also a general term that we learn in our expert, and also sometimes it's really difficult, when we do a lot of things as a gender mechanism, but when we do not have enough data or statistics, it seems like very nothing, because we do not have any concrete, because gender mainstreaming is about we work on mainstreaming gender, we work on changing behavior, but if we do not have data to show the progress, it seems like it's hard to show our efforts. And sometimes when we go to do advocate, right now everyone and policymaker, they need evidence base. So if we do not have concrete data and statistics, it's very challenging, because they ask what the benefit, what our loss if we do not respond gender mainstreaming and gender equality. And also currently in our country, we do gender responsive budgeting. We also work with the Ministry of Economic Finance. They also ask about budget-based, evidence-based, budget evidence-based. So what the evidence, what to show your work. This is something that very crucial for us to work around and strengthen this system. And as well, for the climate change, we also need more concrete data on women and men who are affected by climate change, who are the more affected, and how and why they are affected. This is something that also help us to develop our concrete plan. And we need to also go beyond the general information on and have a concrete example on the climate change, and also from the other sector as well. So allow me go to a very brief 2 slides for the next step in Cambodia. That we need to keep working more with our counterpart, National Institute on Statistics, and on how to. I will move more on climate change, that we have a plan specific with that. And for other sectors as well, we will work more on improve their questionnaire, and also some area that we still limit. And number 2, we work with gender machinery, especially our Ministry, Women Affairs, on strengthening the capacity and also ability on gender and statistics, as well as on how to identify the priority in order to work with the with the statistic counterpart, because for example, like in Cambodia, we have gender mainstreaming working group. So they also need to find out what the concrete and where the priority that when they work with the statistic counterpart and in each sector. And number three, we need to also keep more working on statistical profile on gender, especially climate change, that we already have a concrete plan working on that. And number four, we will keep more coordinating and promoting gender research study program on the issue on the new issue, emerging issue on women and gender, climate change, and other priority in the country. So go back very quick to what we plan to do and also how we get and where we are on the project on climate change, and also under the support on UN Women. And so far we have a consultation, we have a stakeholder meeting, we also come up with the proposal, and we also last month we got a training with our officer and also line ministry, working with Jessica and also our counterpart UN Women Cambodia. And also we will plan to conduct a consultative on this guideline, or this integrated gender in climate change in Cambodia. So hopefully from that perspective on our plan for the context, for the idea of the climate change, we will talk more with our National Institute on Statistics on how to use that guideline to improve more gender statistics in the climate change as well. So this is all from what experience from Cambodia, very brief. So I happy to and also welcome for any clarification and also any question regarding to our experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And again, really insightful around the importance of data in advocacy, M&E, and gender budgeting. Without the data, it's very difficult to do results-based management. And I think this is an important point also about who is affected by climate change and why. And this is a key data that is needed not only in Cambodia but across the world. So thank you very much for that. We will now open for questions. Again, you can put questions in chat, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question of any of the presenters on the user perspective. And whilst we're waiting for people to think about their questions or to share their questions, perhaps if I could ask Tay, what in your experience are the barriers for properly using gender data for climate action? You mentioned some of the challenges, but if you could speak perhaps to the barriers for properly using gender data on climate action. I think you're still muted.
Okay, thank you for the question. Like what you said, we face when we do our first attention to the gender and climate change in Cambodia and also in the administrative data, there are also a lack of six designated data, and also the analysis the impact. So mostly we use only the lesson learned or the experience from the regional and the other country only. So that's why we also need to work on, we need to work more with our civil society and also researcher as well, in order to produce more on that information and also finding. And also we also need to work more than what we already planned with the national statistics. And the challenge also here is not only climate change, but also in general when we produce or when we propose anything new for that. The key challenge is about like we need to find out what the concrete value for allowing them to understand and to agree this proposal. And also when we work with our counterpart on NIS, the National National Institute of Statistics, they also really concerned about the costing when they add the question. So this is something that when we face, when we get the discussion with our counterpart of the statistics. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the cost of things is important, but it is a relevant consideration. But this also goes back to the point about gender budgeting and how that can be built in. I'm not seeing any hands or any questions in the chat. If that's the case, we could move on to our last section, which was again to get some responses from those who are participating, to share with us some views on and reflect on the things that have happened in the workshop today, the experiences that have been shared. So going again to menti.com using the same code 6168665, and that's in the chat as well. What are the most promising ideas and solutions for improving gender data on climate change and disaster risk reduction? We've heard some suggestions for solutions and some actual implementation of solutions today. It would be really useful to also hear from participants their ideas on what they see as the most promising ideas and solutions for improving gender data on climate change and disaster risk reduction. Right, gender responsive policies. So the importance of having this embedded also in policy. And that was clear from a number of presentations, including from Fiji. Data linking to make the most of existing data. This is a very important point around, it's not that there is no data out there, data does exist, and it is a very important element of working out how to most effectively utilize that data. And I think that there is a real need for sharing of good practice, of case studies that do where you can see the value of gender data. A dedicated gender database system can be useful because it helps to focus and is a way in which people can easily access information. Gender responsive monitoring and evaluation of strategies and policies. So not just at the beginning when we're planning, but also all the way through to monitoring and evaluation. Gender responsive budgeting, identification of data requirements for humanitarian development nexus. This is another element that's come through in the presentations, is the need to identify the specifics of what data is relevant in this context. and that women's resilience in climate change can be enhanced by the full participation of women in decision making, so that perspectives and needs are also, and there's a diversity of thought in the decision making, reliability of data and data sources, and there was the example from Kiribati with the tablet, which has improved the reliability and quality of the data. Yes, and finding donors who are willing to support this work, and there are donors who are willing to support the work. So this is something that around the advocacy, and another reason why case studies are useful is in the presentation of the value of this information in this context. Finding the time, yes, making the time for qualitative data is also a promising idea and a needed activity. Yes, there were the last presentation, also Cambodia, but also a number of the presentations have highlighted the importance of a multi-stakeholder approach in this context, and that includes statistical offices, but also across civil society and other government areas. Yes, definitely working with researchers is and looking for partners outside of perhaps the traditional thinking about who is working in the space. So moving then to, and so all of these answers are captured and I assume I will be shared. So we are going to move on to the next question. So what support is needed to improve gender data in your context? We've certainly heard some of the challenges today and the barriers to implementation. So here, if you could share with us all what sort of support would be useful in the context in which you're working to improve gender data. It'll take a moment. Not seeing any responses yet, but that may just be a slight delay in entering and appearing. Okay, so information sharing is definitely something that this workshop has been part of that process, and capacity building. National level discussions, a connection to donors, yep. Okay, so people and budget. Very important things. Yeah, being able to adapt training materials to national context is important. Identifying and being able to include relevant stakeholders to produce data collection for all activities. And I think there are, as I say, there were a number of these issues were also highlighted in the presentations. So moving now to our last question. And that is, what is your key takeaway from this workshop? Having heard all of these experiences the wonderful presentations from our presenters, and thank you to our presenters for sharing this information with us today. What are your key takeaways from the workshop? I agree. There is a lot of interesting work going on, and it's really it's been a wonderful opportunity to share that work. And that includes a significant amount of attention and effort in making disaggregation of data possible. And it's very encouraging to see that. Okay, and an important question about what is the next step, and I'm sure we will get to that in just a moment. Yeah, thinking about how to upscale the work the great work that's being done, and to be able to share this with a broader audience. And we can certainly, the UNFCCC can certainly help with convening at an international level if that's useful. Knowing about different practices and efforts going on for gender data, yeah. It's different countries are at different levels, and there is a lot to be offered through peer-to-peer country exchange. I think that was a very clear message throughout the presentations today, that collaborative efforts with all stakeholders is necessary in order for this to be effective. That I will need to wait for a moment until that one can scroll down. Can we be given the chance to pursue with some of our own approaches with the support of, yeah, so that there are, in fact, there are other ideas that are out there at the moment that still need to be supported. Yeah, it was very useful and interesting to hear the different country experiences and the developments and their efforts in mainstreaming gender across environmental statistics. Well, I think those are important takeaways, and is a reflection of the richness of the presentations today. So I'm just going to check and see who, whether we are very close to our time. So I think it is an opportunity for us to have some final words. From UN Women or UNDR.
Hi, Fleur, and hi, everyone. This is Rina from UN Women. Thank you to everyone to your contributions to this workshop. I was really delighted to hear many experiences from the country level, both in production of statistics and also in the user side as well. And I also like to emphasize what has been said throughout the presentation and also now at the key takeaways, is that this is really a team effort which requires all of us and many other agencies also to work together towards the goal of having gender responsive data collection systems, and also all the way to the monitoring and evaluation of the policies and actions that we do with the help of this data. There were also many questions about what are the next steps. So from the Empower project perspective, we will keep on working in this topic at least for 2 years more, as it's the time of the project. And we will keep on providing information sharing platforms such as this one also next year. So we're very happy to keep you all informed of that. And also we are happy to receive any ideas if you have like a concrete information need or idea for what kind of sharing we could organize. So please do not hesitate to reach out to me. With regards to also the work that Empower will be doing next week, so next year, is that we are also kickstarting our work with regards to monitoring, reporting, and verification work, and how to make this gender responsive. So I hope to meet you again in that regard sometime next year. And finally, I wish to encourage everyone to pursue data collection and reprocessing of data from gender perspective, especially in the context of climate change and disasters, as even though now with the pandemic, we have obviously everyone experienced very rapid changes in our life and working environments, but the truth is that there's no vaccine for climate change or disasters, so we need to keep on working on this topic for longer and rigorously. And very finally, thank you everyone from my behalf and from UN Women. It has been great learning experience also for us. Over to Fleur, and if anybody else wants to say your final words.
Thank you, Rina, and thank you for the collaboration with UN Women and UNDRR. As I said at the beginning, these collaborations are very important for us to be able to support countries as they raise their ambition on addressing climate change and building resilience and dealing with disaster risk reduction. So I think that's it. In which case, thank you very much to all our presenters and to all participants for making this workshop a rich and rewarding experience. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.